A number of developments in Gaza this evening on the ground, with the blockade and the military occupation and operation to defeat and dismantle Hamas, in the words of the Israeli government. Now, firstly, in the past half hour, a joint statement issued by France, the UK and Canada too, threatening, quote, concrete actions against Israel, including sanctions for its activities in Gaza and the West Bank too. It's a joint statement that says the Israeli decision to allow a limited, quote, basic amount of aid earlier today into Gaza, more than 5 trucks were told, after nearly 3 months of blockade, is wholly inadequate. The statement also goes on to say Israel should stop its egregious new military actions in Gaza and immediately allow in more humanitarian aid. So the context of this, earlier today we had a video message on social media from Benjamin Netanyahu putting out that they were deciding to end temporarily the blockade, allowing more food in, and also taking the whole of Gaza. What the UN humanitarian chief has also said, this is Antonio Guterres, this is a drop in the ocean of what's urgently needed, talking about 600 trucks needed per day. Let's go to Jerusalem. Let's bring in our correspondent, Noga Tarnopolsky. Noga, great to talk to you this evening. There is a lot to be said here. Shall we begin with what you're making of the international pressure on Netanyahu and how much of a factor that has been in what we're seeing so far?
Good evening, Gavin. Look, it's an unprecedented situation, so I do want to be cautious in describing it. Israel is a young country, 77 years old, and in its entire history, it has never, ever confronted the threat of actual concrete sanctions, to quote the statement from its closest allies. It's an unusual situation for any country. Netanyahu today did a kind of public somersault. He has made a mockery out of the notion of aid, allowing 5 humanitarian aid trucks in to a population of 2 million people who have been besieged and have no aid for a full 2 months after more than a year of war, is really to mock the notion of renewing humanitarian aid, which is the demand of the international community. And I want to add the demand of a growing number of Israelis as well. But Netanyahu has sort of barricaded himself. He is unpopular among Israelis. He's growingly unpopular among world leaders. He's isolated. And he has chosen to stick by the demands of his most extremist coalition allies. It's worth remembering, I'll give you one example. Israel's national security minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, has never before held public office. He was a guy convicted 13 times of hate crimes and terror associations, belonging to a movement that was outlawed both in Israel and in the United States, the movement of Jewish power, of Kahana, Mayor Rabbi Kahana. And he has become one of the most important and probably the most influential minister in Netanyahu's government, because without him, Netanyahu can't hold on to power. And Netanyahu is on trial. And so somehow the Palestinians, the Israelis, and increasingly a very fearful international community who have long seen Israel as an ally are just starting to feel that this can't continue. But Netanyahu perseveres.
What's very interesting, and you've picked up on it, the unknown that we're at, this letter of sanctions, the fact that this came hours after what was this? The video message, we're starting to see a few lorries coming in. And let's face it, you talked about this yesterday, Noga, the difficulty which the Israeli administration seemed to have in getting this through the Security Cabinet and the far-right members of it, absolutely not wanting any aid to go in. And we're also seeing a quote in the Washington Post today, aren't we, being picked up in the Israeli media, that there were essentially some kind of ultimatum put out, it's reported, from President Trump as well.
That's right. Israeli media is almost in hysterics over this quote. Again, I want us to be cautious because this is a blind quote, unattributed, in the last paragraph of a long story in the Washington Post. Nonetheless, the language is very precise. And this is a quote from an American official close to the Israeli-American proceedings right now, who says that the Trump administration has made it clear to Israel that, quote, we will abandon them, that Israel will be abandoned, that's the language, if it does not agree to an end to the war. Now, Netanyahu's calculation, again, is that he can remain in power so long as war continues. It's a unique and dangerous calculation. Last November, Netanyahu, under US pressure, agreed to a ceasefire with Hezbollah, the Hamas-linked Islamist group in Lebanon. Hezbollah was not completely demolished. It still exists. And yet Netanyahu did agree to that ceasefire, which has held now for a good half of a year. What Netanyahu is doing regarding Gaza is refusing any proposal for any sort of a truce or a ceasefire or a long-lasting arrangement that doesn't include what he calls the absolute destruction of Hamas. He used a very strange term yesterday. He said the final victory over Hamas, a term with historic connotations. So he seems to be demanding something that is undefined and possibly impossible without conjuring up a replacement entity that could take over power instead of Hamas. And right now, he is dragging much of the Western world, and again, Palestinians and Israelis with him, into this predicament.
And it gets to the heart of this, doesn't it? A number of things. We first heard within that video statement from Benjamin Netanyahu, he talked about his allies listening to Western friends. He didn't talk about humanitarian concerns or from aid agencies or organisations. We also have a situation where he's got to respond at some sense to this letter, hasn't he? This call from France, UK and Canada threatening concrete actions. There's a kind of junction we're at here, aren't we? And remember the words from Yossi Beilin that we talked about the other day, Noga, the former Deputy Foreign Minister, who was talking about Israel risking being a pariah state, saying that the actions of Benjamin Netanyahu, it appeared that he doesn't want the war to end. He said is delaying the release of hostages for his own political survival. So we are at another key junction now.
We absolutely are, and the threat right now is concrete. Again, this is an extraordinary statement from three countries who have been committed to including Israel in the Western alliance for the entirety of its existence. And now they're threatening Israel with sanctions as if it were North Korea, Iran. It is absolutely the language one uses against a pariah state. Now, the Americans are still not there. And again, I don't want to make too much of this quote in the Washington Post, but President Trump visited this region, in a very kind of grandiose, ostentatious visit last week. He skipped over Israel completely. He barely mentioned Israel during his entire visit to this region. And Prime Minister Netanyahu's office made a big deal, leaking in the last few days, that Vice President Vance was going to come visit Israel, as if this were some kind of compensation for the isolation that Israelis are beginning to perceive that Netanyahu has brought them to. And it turns out to have been apparently just a figment of the hope of Netanyahu and not more. Vice President Vance was in the Vatican to attend the inauguration of the new Pope. He met the Israeli president, among many other leaders. He sat down with the Pope. It's unclear if it ever occurred to him to visit Israel, or, as if we saw in a report in Axios today, that he decided not to give an American imprimatur to Israel's renewed military action in Gaza and thus decided not to come. Either way, Israel is clearly increasingly isolated.
Very briefly, Noga, are you getting any details? These questions that were around this morning, are they any clearer today about even the comparatively small amount of trucks going in, how Israel says it's going to manage them not getting into the hands and being looted by Hamas?
No, we have no information. We have no information about how the paltry amount of material that gets in on 5 trucks can be distributed to a population, a 2 million person population that needs this aid. And we also have no information about how they're keeping it out of Hamas' hands. Again, the Israeli government has refused all along during this war to accept any replacement entity for Hamas. And thus it has empowered Hamas to continue, even debilitated as it is, to exert a certain amount of force in Gaza.
Noga, good to talk to you as always. Noga Tarnopolsky, our correspondent in downtown Jerusalem tonight.
Thank you.
Let's move from